Okay, our next speaker is Dr. Ron Daniels, who's going to speak to us about specifically intensive care areas of your work, as you're an intensive care consultant and the founder and CMO of Sepsis Trust. So, thank you, Ron. You don't need that. You okay? Just one slide.
That's it.
Oh, fantastic.
So, good morning, everyone. As you've heard, my name is Ron. I stand here before you as the founder and chief medical officer of the UK-based charity, the UK Sepsis Trust, and also as one of the vice presidents of the Global Sepsis Alliance. But I think most importantly, I am but a humble adult human intensive care doctor. As an intensive care doctor treating adult humans, we don't deal with pediatrics. I'm also standing here attempting to engage you without slides, so I stand here very much subject to your judgment. Now, and I'm wearing the same outfit. Sepsis is the final common pathway to death from the majority of infectious diseases worldwide, including dengue, including Ebola, and including the current COVID-19 pandemic. And when I say current, that's because those were the words of Dr. Tedros, the Director General of the World Health Organization, in September of 2020. And it's very true that certainly in high-income countries with ready access to oxygen, ready access to ventilators, that a majority of people who died during the COVID-19 pandemic in intensive care did so with viral sepsis. Now, what is sepsis, for those of you who are neither vet nor medic? Well, it's the way the body responds to an infection. So it's always triggered by an infection, but in sepsis, the body's immune system goes into overdrive. It reacts abnormally, and that starts to cause organ damage. Now, what about the quanta? Well, recently, the Institute for Health Metrics Evaluation issued global notice of new estimates of the burden of sepsis. And they estimated that sepsis affects 49 million humans around the world, claiming 11 million lives, with half of those lives lost being children under 5 in resource-poor countries. Now, those are big numbers, but without context, they might mean little to you. Cancer, and these data are probably skewed by underdiagnosis of cancer in resource-poor countries, but cancer claims 9.6 million lives every year, compared with the 11 million lost to sepsis. Sepsis is an enormously prevalent problem, accounting for 1 in 5 lives lost. But of course, it's not a problem only affecting humans. Since I came into contact with this wonderful organization, I started to look around at the other members of the animal kingdom. And of course, we all know and expect that mammals are equally prone to sepsis, but described in the literature is insect sepsis, mollusk sepsis, bird sepsis. Everything can get sepsis. Now, back to the human world. What if our mainstay of treatment were no longer effective? We don't have any magic therapies, any magic bullets in the human world for people with sepsis. We only have supportive therapy, which will often include intensive care, and we have controlling the source of infection, using primarily antibiotics, but also perhaps surgery, interventional radiology to remove a source of infection. Those are our mainstays of treatment. And what if our antimicrobials no longer work? Of course, we won't see only 11 million humans dying every year as a consequence of sepsis. We will see 49 million humans dying every year as a consequence of sepsis, but it will be more than that, because sepsis is increasing in prevalence as our population ages, as our population becomes increasingly comorbid, and as human population density increases. The bugs causing it are spreading too. It's not just sepsis that's growing, there's pathogen migration. And that's impacted upon by human displacement. Of course, the globalization of humankind has impacted on it, but we displaced humans with poverty, with war, with famine. We bring about climate change, or there happens climate change, whichever you believe. We're not here to discuss that today, which increases the habitats of our pathogens. And we're already seeing my colleagues in southern Europe now are not surprised when they see home-contracted malaria, when they see home-contracted dengue fever. These pathogens are spreading. Dame Sally Davies, a number of years ago, issued public messaging around antimicrobial resistance. She has done more than any other human being on this planet to raise public awareness of AMR. But the message our public heard is that if we don't act now, then when you're 70 years old, you might not be able to safely have a hip replacement. And that was not the right public message, with great respect, Dame Sally. Because antimicrobial resistance is here right now. It is here today. It is here in its thousands of patients in our hospitals around the UK. Now, I spent last week working in one of my smaller hospitals where the intensive care unit only has 11 beds. That's quite a small intensive care unit. On my intensive care unit last week, only 7 of those beds were occupied, which was a very nice position to be in. But of those 7 patients, 3 of them were there with multi-drug resistant organisms. About a year ago, I was treating a long-distance lorry driver who'd come over from Poland, and he had sepsis secondary to an organism that was only sensitive to the very last resort antibiotics. The ones that those of you have heard of it, the NICE subscription model pilot, is funding. Without that pilot, we would not have these antibiotics. It was ceftazidime avibactam that saved his life. Now, if we didn't have that antibiotic, not only would Poland have lost a productive man in his 40s who would be continuing to contribute to society, but 2 children would have lost their dad, and a wife would have lost her husband. This is here now. We are also seeing huge inequalities. If you go to the city of Leicester, around 1 million inhabitants, quite a small city, if you look at people who present to hospital with E. coli infections, which are incredibly common, if they are from areas of low socioeconomic deprivation, the high-income areas, they have a 40% risk of those E. coli being resistant to the first antibiotic. If they're from an area of high deprivation, it's 80%. It's double. The inequality with respect to antimicrobial resistance is astonishing. And why? Well, antibiotics and multi-drug resistant organisms are all around us. In Greece, 60% of rivers are contaminated by extended spectrum beta-lactamase producing E. coli. 60% of their rivers contain those killer superbugs. In the UK, you would hope it's better. Well, it is, but not transformationally. 12% of our rivers are contaminated with ESBL-producing E. coli. The rate of hospitalization with resistant E. coli sepsis among surfers is 4 times higher than the non-surfing population because of exposure. Now, the UK and Scandinavian countries, and to a lesser extent the United States, have made wonderful progress with reducing injudicious use of antibiotics in intensive farming particularly, and of course, as most of you will know better than I, the use of antimicrobials as growth promoters has been outlawed for many years. And our supermarket chains have been active, but some more than others. Many have ensured that their own brand meat produce is reared without the use of antibiotics. But the imported meals, often in the ready meals, they're full of antibiotics. Even milk in some countries contains antibiotics that have been excreted by the livestock that have been administered the antibiotics, and they exist in the food chain for other livestock. So not so much in the UK, it's only 0.17% of our milk samples contain antibiotics, but in other countries, the milk that you drink includes antibiotics. And we have got to stop this. We have got to reduce our reliance on antibiotics in the food chain. We've got to reduce contamination of our food chain with antibiotics. So what hope is there? If I told you that 12% of our rivers, 1 in 8 of our rivers contain killer superbugs, If I've told you that you're consuming superbugs when you have that chicken Rogan Josh because you've been too busy during the day and you get it out of the freezer and you put it in the microwave, what hope do we have if I tell you that my hospital already has a significant proportion of patients who are there because of antibiotic-resistant infections? Well, I think there is a lot that we can do. We can continue putting pressure on governments to improve the way in which we use antibiotics. Antibiotics are not bad. Antibiotics are essential to save lives. In the UK alone, we see about 245,000 people affected by sepsis every year. Without antibiotics, they'd die. There are 1.7 million people admitted to hospital with severe bacterial infection in the UK every year. The majority of those would die without antibiotics. As an intensive care consultant, I don't see anyone dying of antimicrobial resistance. I see people dying of infections I can't treat because of antimicrobial resistance. It's the pathogens that is bringing about their demise. So we have to continue to engage governments. We have to continue to engage the public. And we have to learn lessons from each other. In the sepsis world, we have as yet failed to identify which humans with sepsis need antimicrobials, how quickly. We as yet failed to identify which immunomodulatory therapies are appropriate in people presenting with specific groups of symptoms or with specific underlying disease. There is huge opportunity to learn. What we have been effective with in sepsis within the UK is public awareness messaging. We now know that 94% of our public have heard of the word sepsis, and 91% of our public know that sepsis is a medical emergency, and my organisation would take part credit for that. We can ensure that we deliver awareness around sepsis in other animals to our general public as well. But I think it's so much more than that. We know we need to incentivise antimicrobial development and novel classes of antimicrobials, but there are other opportunities here. There are non-antibiotic therapies which can be shown to be highly effective against certain bacterial infections. Phage therapy with bacteriophages is under renewed scrutiny and undergoing new scientific testing. These predatory viruses that can target and destroy pathogenic bacteria. We know that there's more than 30,000 compounds with antimicrobial properties that we already know about in the plant kingdom. And we know that there are antimicrobial peptides that are being discovered every year in the animal kingdom, including, for example, one of the most reported is the one from the octopus, which has significant activity against carbapenemase-producing Acinetobacter, which is a really frightening pathogen. But I think what we really need to do is to tackle this problem of E. coli. If you look at the medical literature, that suggests that a multi-drug resistant E. coli could well be our next pandemic. And if it's resistant to all but the last resort antibiotics, that is going to make COVID-19 look like child's play. So we have to begin to open our minds. We have to look where else we can find effective compounds against bacterial infection. We have to look at the unexplored areas of the world in our oceans, and that's why one of the things I'm most excited about at the moment is working with the Proteus Ocean Group, which is run by Fabien Cousteau, who is the grandson of Jacques Cousteau, and they are gaining significant traction toward funding the world's first underwater space station to deliver scientific analysis of what's under the ocean and how it can benefit human health. I think we need to do all of these things, and I think we need to think about the steps we as individuals can take, including possibly reducing our reliance on intensively farmed meat, because that is fueling part of this problem. We need to think about how those on lower incomes can access high-quality protein that's been produced without reliance on antibiotics. And we need the government to step up and do this. We need to all do this as individuals, not because it's the right thing to do, or not only because it's the right thing to do, but also because to fail to do this will deliver an existential threat not only to humankind, but also to the animals we love, rely on, and need and use in our food chain. So thank you very much for the opportunity to Joe and colleagues. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. I hope that without slides, I managed to engage some of you for part of the time, and I will be around later to chat. Thank you very much.